The man who had 700 wives wrote one of the saddest sentences in the entire Bible. I want you to hear it. Not the famous verses, not the wisdom about rulers, about fools, about the virtuous woman. This one. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 8. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother, and there was no end to his labor, yet his eyes were not satisfied with riches. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Read that again. A man alone, no son, no brother, no witness to his labor, no one for whom the work is done. Solomon, who had 700 wives, 300 concubines, a court so magnificent that foreign rulers traveled for months to spend a single afternoon in his presence, wrote those words. And every careful scholar of this text across 3,000 years has arrived at the same uncomfortable conclusion. He was not writing about someone else. He was writing about himself. I want to be careful about how I say what I'm about to say, because what I am claiming is not a spiritual reading, not an allegorical interpretation, not the kind of soft suggestion that allows you to take it or leave it. It is the scholarly consensus. Tremper Longman III, whose commentary on Ecclesiastes is among the most rigorous in the field, he argues that the lone man of Ecclesiastes 4, verse 8 is not a hypothetical figure constructed to make a philosophical point. It is confession. It is the king looking at himself. Michael Fox, whose work on Cohort is considered essential for anyone serious about the Hebrew text, he reads the same passage the same way. Choon-Leong Seow, whose Ecclesiastes commentary is standard reading in academic theology, same conclusion. The man alone, working without end, asking for whom he labors, calling his own condition Ra, the Hebrew word for evil, was the wisest man in the world, surrounded by 1,000 people, describing his own interior life. And he called it evil. Not sad, not unfortunate, not the natural condition of a busy king. Evil. Ra is a strong word in Hebrew. Ecclesiastes uses it only 22 times in the entire book. Solomon reserves it for specific conditions, for the deepest forms of wrongness, for what should not be. And he used it to describe the state of a man who has no one, not an empty house, a life without witness. I have been sitting with this verse for a long time, longer than I expected to when I first stopped on it. My father died in Lagos some years ago. He had retired from the federal ministry. My mother had died 2 years before him, and the house was full, cousins visiting, grandchildren coming and going, the television always on, someone always in the kitchen. I visited when I was 51, perhaps 52. I flew in from Oxford on a Thursday. We sat on the veranda in the late afternoon. The garden had gone a little wild. He was looking at it in the particular way that older men look at things they used to tend. The house was full. There were 3 grandchildren inside doing something with a phone. My aunt's daughter was visiting. A neighbor had stopped by. My father looked at the garden for a long time, and then he said something in Igbo. Not to me particularly. Just into the afternoon. Mobe mama no emno. Kao nogi embu otu onye. When your mother was here, I existed. Since she left, I am one person. I flew back to Oxford on the Sunday. I opened Ecclesiastes 4, verse 8, and for the first time in 20 years of reading this text academically, I heard it differently. I heard my father's voice in it. There was a man all alone. The house was full. He was completely alone. Not the loneliness of empty rooms, the loneliness of presence without contact, of being surrounded by people who love you and somehow, across the accumulated silences, losing the chord. Solomon's Hebrew word for alone is bad. It does not mean solitary in the sense of physical isolation. It means singular, separated from connection at the deepest level. You can be bad in a crowd. Solomon was. Let me show you what he wrote immediately after that verse, because the structure of Ecclesiastes 4 verses 8 through 12 is not accidental. Verse 8 is the diagnosis. Verses 9 through 12 are the prescription, and the speed with which he moves from the first to the second tells you something about how urgently he understood the problem. He does not let the diagnosis breathe long. He writes the diagnosis. There is a man all alone. It is evil. And he moves immediately to the remedy, as if he had been carrying both things at the same time for a long time, the wound and the treatment, written one after the other. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their effort. The Hebrew is precise, for their labor, amal. The same word as the labor in verse 8, the labor for which the lone man has no one to share it with. Solomon takes the word of the wound and places it at the center of the remedy. The lone man labors with no reward. Two people labor together and the same effort produces something more. Not because two people are twice as productive, because witnessed labor has a quality that unwitnessed labor does not. The reward is not only the product, the reward is having been seen, verse 10. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up. And then Solomon adds a sentence that is so quiet and so devastating that most people read past it without stopping. But pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. He does not say the person who falls alone will not recover. He says, pity them. That word, pity, is the preacher's expression of genuine grief, not clinical observation. Grief. Solomon, who has diagnosed everything in Ecclesiastes with the detachment of a philosopher, pauses here to grieve. He is grieving for the person who falls with no one to lift them. He may be grieving for himself. Verse 11. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person alone keep warm? This verse has been read as commentary on marriage, on friendship, on community, but there is a physiological precision here that I have never been able to read as purely metaphorical. The cold that Solomon describes is not weather. John Cacioppo spent his career studying loneliness at the University of Chicago. What he found is this: lonely people who experience what he defined as perceived social isolation, regardless of how many people are physically present, sleep less efficiently. Their bodies register the isolation as a threat, the same survival mechanism that activates in response to hunger or physical danger activates in response to being alone. The nervous system treats loneliness as a form of cold. The body temperature regulation that normally occurs during close physical proximity, the shared warmth Solomon describes in verse 11, is not a metaphor for emotional connection. It is a literal physiological need. When Solomon asks, how can one person alone keep warm? He is asking a medical question. And 3,000 years later, the loneliness researcher at the University of Chicago found the same answer. They cannot. Not fully. Not the way two people together can. Verse 12. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is where Solomon's architecture reveals itself completely. He has moved from 2, companion in labor, companion in falling, companion in warmth, to 2 plus 1 more. The cord, 3 strands, not 2. He is not describing a friendship. He is not describing a marriage. He is not describing a community or a congregation or a social network. He is describing the minimum viable human relationship, the irreducible structure that makes a life survivable. You plus one person plus something beyond both of you. 3 strands. He does not name the 3rd strand directly. He leaves it open. Whether you call it God, the divine, the larger life, the 3rd strand is the element that makes the cord unbreakable. Because 2 strands can fray, 2 strands can come under the same pressure at the same moment, and both give at once. The 3rd strand holds what the other 2 cannot hold for themselves. Solomon, who had everything, who stood at the summit of every external measure of abundance, arrived at this as the essential thing, not more. 3 strands, 1 person, 1. Now let me bring you to the part that I think changes how you hear all of this. The Harvard study of adult development began in 1938. It is the longest continuous study of human happiness in the history of modern science. 80 years. The same cohort tracked from youth to death. Not a survey, not a snapshot, a continuous longitudinal study of what actually determines how a life goes. Robert Waldinger, the 4th director of the study, published the findings in a way that anyone can access. The question the study was designed to answer: what allows people to thrive in old age? The answer they found after 80 years, the clearest, most consistent, most powerful predictor of health and happiness in later life, was not wealth, not prestige, not exercise, not diet, not physical health at 50, the quality of close relationships, not the number, not the variety, the quality, One relationship of depth predicted physical brain health at 80 more reliably than cholesterol levels, not a network, not a community. 1. The Harvard study, after 80 years and billions of data points, arrived at Ecclesiastes 4 verse 9. 2 are better than 1. The reward is real, the lift is real, the warmth is real, and the absence of it, the condition of the man alone, the man of verse 8, is not a spiritual problem or a philosophical abstraction. It is a medical fact. The United States Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic in 2023. Roughly half of American adults report measurable loneliness. The highest rates are not in young people, who are assumed to be most isolated. The highest rates are in adults 45 to 65 and in adults over 75. The period between 50 and 65 is the least discussed, the least addressed, the least visible. Children have grown and left. Some careers are peaking or ending. Close friends, some of them, have died. Marriages that once had the easy proximity of shared daily life have sometimes gone quiet. Retired colleagues drift. The social architecture that surrounded your 40s is no longer there, and what replaces it has not yet been built. Not empty calendar loneliness, full calendar loneliness, the kind you can have in a house full of grandchildren, the kind my father had on that veranda, the kind Solomon had with 700 wives. Full calendar loneliness is not about presence, it is about the cord, whether it holds, whether both ends are held, whether anyone is on the other side. I want to say something about why this hits differently after 50, because I think it is important to be honest about the specific character of this particular loneliness, rather than blurring it into general human isolation. After 50, you have a history. You have already had the deep connections, some of them. You know what it felt like. You know the difference between the people who have known you in the full sense and the people who have been present without knowing you. The loneliness that arrives after 50 is not the loneliness of someone who has never experienced depth of connection. It is the loneliness of someone who has, and who is now watching it recede, or who has lost it, or who finds themselves in a life surrounded by people who are kind, who are well-intentioned, but who do not hold the other end of the cord. That is a particular kind of ache. Solomon names it Ra, evil. Not because the condition is morally wrong, because it is wrong in the sense of misaligned. It is the fundamental inversion of what a life is meant to be. We are designed at the deepest level for the cord. The body knows it. The nervous system knows it. The brain knows it. 80 years of Harvard data knows it. And Solomon knew it 3,000 years ago. Let me show you where else this understanding lives. The Quran preserves the story of Yusuf, Joseph, in Surah 12. It is the most emotionally detailed narrative in the entire Quran. Yusuf is thrown into a pit by his brothers. He is enslaved. He is imprisoned on a false accusation. 3 separate isolations. At each stage, the Quran does not describe the rescue that is coming. It describes the internal state of the man in isolation. And the most repeated word in the surah is sabr, patient endurance in the presence of hardship. But the narrative is not primarily about endurance. It is about something the Quran says explicitly at the moment of each isolation. God was with Yusuf. The isolation was real. The abandonment was real. But Yusuf was not alone in the deepest sense. Solomon's cord of 3 strands contains exactly this logic. The third strand, the one that makes the cord unbreakable, is the presence that remains when the human connections fray. Suleiman's wisdom and Yusuf's experience say the same thing from opposite sides. Suleiman diagnoses the loneliness and prescribes the cord. Yusuf lives the loneliness and demonstrates what the third strand provides when the first 2 are cut. The divine companion does not replace the human companion, but it holds the cord when the human hand cannot. Now go to West Africa. In the Yoruba tradition, Ori is the inner companion, the personal divine essence that is assigned before birth and walks alongside a person throughout their entire life. When someone experiences profound, persistent loneliness, not the loneliness of circumstance, but the deep structural loneliness of disconnection from what one is meant to be connected to, the Yoruba diviner does not diagnose too few friends. They diagnose Ori Buruku, a misalignment between the person and their inner companion. The isolation is not primarily social. It is the condition of someone who has lost contact with the companion that has always been there. And the remedy is a ritunju ori, a restoration of relationship with the self's own divine companion. The third strand. Igbo tradition speaks of Chi, the personal God who walks with you, the portion of the divine that is yours specifically, your companion from before birth. Chinua Achebe, writing on Chi in Igbo cosmology in 1975, described the relationship as the most intimate possible, more intimate than any human relationship because the Chi knows you before you know yourself. To be alone in the deepest sense, in the sense Solomon means when he writes Ra, is to be cut off from your Chi, not from your community, from your own interior companion. The cord of 3 strands in the Igbo understanding is not 3 external relationships. It is you, the one other person who knows you fully, and the Chi who has always known you. Solomon does not name the third strand. The Igbo tradition names it for him. I want to come back to my father, because the cord he had lost was not a social network. It was one person, my mother. She had been the witness, the one who knew him in the full sense, who had been present to his working life, his private disappointments, his humor, the ways he was when no one was performing for anyone, the one who held the other end of the cord for 40 years. When she died, the cord did not break dramatically. It frayed. The house was full. The cord was gone. And my father, who was loved by many people, who was respected, who had grandchildren who adored him, who had cousins and neighbors and lifelong colleagues, my father was the lone man of Ecclesiastes 4, verse 8, not alone, bad, singular, cut off from the witness that made his existence fully real. He could not articulate it as Solomon articulated it. He found his own words. When your mother was here, I existed. He was describing the same thing Solomon described. The cord. What it means when it holds. What the world is like when it does not. That afternoon on the veranda was the last long conversation we had. I went back to Oxford and I thought, for months, that I should call more, visit more, stay longer. I did not understand that the problem was not frequency of contact. The problem was that I could not restore what he had lost. I could be present. I could not be her. I could give him a strand. But the cord that had organized his life was gone, and the only thing that could have held it was the third strand, the one Solomon points to without naming. I have thought about this often, what I could have done, what I should have said, whether I understood it in time. I still do not know the complete answer, but I know now what Solomon was pointing to, and I know that my father knew it too, in the language his grandfather's language gave him. He was not lost. He was otu onye, one person, waiting for the cord to be restored. Here is what I want to give you before I close. The Harvard study found that quality of close relationships at 50 predicts brain health at 80. Not at 80, at 50. The measurement is taken in the middle of the life, when the cord is either strong or beginning to fray. Solomon's prescription in verses 9 through 12 is not a prescription for the elderly. It is a prescription for now, for the middle of the life, before the fraying goes too far. Before the full calendar, loneliness has settled into a condition so ambient you have stopped noticing it is there. Solomon's architecture is precise about this. Verse 8, the diagnosis. Verses 9 through 12, the prescription. He does not wait. He does not say, here is the problem, and in a later book we will address the remedy. He writes the diagnosis and the remedy one after the other. As a man who understood that the window for tending the cord is not infinite, let me be careful about what I am not saying. I am not saying that being alone is wrong. Solitude is not what Solomon diagnoses as Ra. He diagnosed bad, singularity, the condition in which there is no other person who holds the other end of the cord. Solitude is chosen. It is restorative. It is available at any time and always available to return from. Bad is not chosen. It is accumulated. It is the gradual attenuation of real contact with another person until what remains is proximity without presence. You can be in complete solitude and not be bad. You can be in a room full of people and be profoundly, completely bad. Solomon was. The distinction matters because the prescription is not, be around more people. The prescription is, Tend one chord. Name the person. Tend the connection. Not your social network, not your community, not your colleagues. One person who holds the other end. The Talmud records a tradition connected to the same chapter of Ecclesiastes. In the tradition of the rabbis who preserved every word Solomon wrote and spent centuries turning them over in their hands, there is an understanding about the cord of 3 strands. The third strand is not optional. 2 strands will hold for a time. But under pressure, and pressure always comes, 2 strands give at once because they are subject to the same forces. The third strand holds what the other 2 cannot hold for each other. It is not a metaphor for God in the way a church might use the phrase. It is a structural observation about what holds when everything is under maximum strain. The human cord, you and one other person, is real and necessary and irreplaceable. But it is not sufficient by itself for everything that a life will ask of it. The third strand is what neither of you can provide for the other. What carries the cord when both hands are unable, Solomon adds it at the end of the prescription. Not as decoration, as architecture. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Not a ritual, not a 3-step practice. A question. Can you name the person? Not your network, not the list of people you would call in various circumstances. The one person who would lift you if you fell, who would know you were called before you said it, who would stand with you against the thing overpowering you, the person who holds the other end of your cord. Can you name them? If you can, the cord exists. And it needs tending the way every cord needs tending, not a grand gesture. Contact this week, not to solve a problem, not to mark an occasion, just to hold the strand, to let the other person know the cord is still in your hands. Solomon's prescription is not complicated. It is the hardest simple thing in the world. Because the older you get, the more the cord has to compete with. The full calendar, the accumulated silence, the assumption that proximity means the cord is fine. Proximity is not the cord. The cord is contact of a specific kind, the kind where you are fully present to one other person, and they are fully present to you. The kind where what passes between you is real. The kind where if you fell they would know. If you can name that person, reach out this week, not this month, this week. Tend the cord. Solomon, who had everything, understood that what holds a person in the world is not what they have. It is who holds the other end, now. If the name did not come quickly, if you sat with the question and there was a pause, and in that pause something settled that felt uncomfortably like the answer, that is not a failure, that is information. And Solomon, who knew the diagnosis intimately, who wrote it with the precision of someone who had lived it, Solomon says something in that same verse about the man who is alone. He asks, "For whom am I toiling?" He does not answer. He lets the question stand. And then he moves immediately to the prescription. He does not stay in the diagnosis. He does not conclude that the condition is permanent. He builds the cord out of the next 3 verses. He describes what 2 people together can do. He describes the warmth. He describes the lifting. He adds the third strand. The information, if you discovered that your cord is thinner than you thought, is not a sentence. It is a beginning. The cord can be built from very little, from one person, from this week, from reaching out to someone who might hold the other end, if you offered them yours. The Harvard study found that the quality of relationships at 50 predicts what happens at 80. You are not at 80 yet. The measurement is being taken now. What you do with the cord now matters for the person you will be in 30 years. Solomon understood this. He understood it too late for himself. He wrote it so that the rest of us might not. I want to leave you with my father's words, not as grief, as instruction. Mukbe mama no emno. When your mother was here, I existed. He was not describing dependency. He was describing what it means to be witnessed by one person who knows you fully. To have the cord held, to exist in the presence of someone who sees you, not the version of you that performs for the world, not the version the full calendar requires, but the one underneath. My father knew he had lost it. He did not know how to rebuild it at 73. And I think about that. I think about it as a man who is 57 now, who has a cord in my own hands, who sometimes goes weeks without tending it properly. Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes 4 in a condition of ara. He was not writing from the other side. He was writing from inside it. And the prescription, the immediate pivot from diagnosis to remedy from verse 8 to verse 9, reads to me like a man who has already waited too long, who is writing the answer he needed years before, who is placing it in the world so that someone else can find it in time. Two are better than one, not 20, not a church, not a community. One person, one chord, 3 strands. Tend it, this week. Think about the person whose name came to you, not later, tonight. What you do with this is entirely up to you. But Solomon, who had 700 chances to get this right, and still found himself writing the saddest verse in Ecclesiastes, Solomon asks you only one thing. Not a ritual, not a seal, not a formula spoken before bed. One question. Can you name the person who holds the other end? And if you can, reach out. Sleep well tonight. Or don't. Not yet. Tend the cord first. It will keep you warmer than you know.